Today's topic is collaboration, and Barry Moline is my guest. Gary is the executive director at California Municipal Utilities Association, and he's also the author of a book called Connect. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well, although Barry's not looking to sell books. I still want to talk about his book. So Barry, thanks for being with me today.
It's great to be with you, Dave. Thanks.
Excellent. Excellent. So I know you said to me just a few minutes ago, look, I don't want to be selling books, but I did read it. I did enjoy it. I read it on my flight to and from Florida a couple of weeks ago, and I thought it was really, really well done. So just to tee us up, why collaboration and why did you write the book?
You know, I've been in the world of work for 4 decades, and I've been a CEO for 25 years. And I've noticed just in the past, 6 or 7 years, I've noticed the steady decline of people interested in working together. And it's kind of weird, but I was talking with a friend. We were working together in a community in South Florida, actually. And we both noticed the same thing. We're having a beer and we were just talking about civility or lack of civility. And in one of those, after a couple of beer drinking moments, we said, somebody ought to write a book. And then it was like, well, maybe we should write a book. And then he said, I don't want to write a book. You write a book, Barry. And I sort of took that challenge and I started Googling like we all do, when we get an idea. And then one thing led to another, the outline was formed. And then I just started working away at it. Ultimately, when I started out, I wasn't sure if it was going to be something that I would eventually finish. Like I said, would it be an article? Would it just be a blog? But as the sort of outline grew, and then what was interesting, I found all these case studies of companies and organizations and individuals that had actually done a great job of collaborating or team building. And I thought, you know what? I think I can put together a book of these stories and then maybe learn something from it that others could benefit as well.
The 4 things that resonated with me are, and I wrote them down, and maybe you can comment on each of these as we go through the conversation. One was the whole concept of equity of voice. I thought that was really interesting when it comes to running a balanced meeting and making sure people are heard. The other thing that I think is so critical that you talk about is assuming positive intent in other people. I could not agree with that more. Civility, you already mentioned, but you also talked a lot about technology and maybe how technology is creating distance with people. So the book is called Connect. You're an engineer by trade, right? So you've spent your whole career in the engineering space. And I've done some work in the engineering space with med device companies, plastics companies, different kinds of organizations. And I'm not an engineer. But the very first engineering client that I ever took on, the COO called me in to meet with the CEO, and they needed a speaker at their annual sales conference. And the COO, the first thing he said is, we don't want any crap around connecting with people and communicating with people or anything like that. We just want a sales talk. And I just said, look, if I can't talk about connecting and communicating, I'm not your guy. And I ended up working with them for almost 6 years. But I find it interesting that you're an engineer, you actually went to school for it, and yet you're interested, you wrote a whole book and you spend your life talking about connecting and communicating. They don't always jive. Am I wrong?
Well, when you start the engineering process, at least early on in a career, you obviously have to get all the equations right. And no matter what the subject is, the bridge has to be engineered properly so it withstands, cars going over it or trains going over it. And, again, everything you see in the built environment started with engineering. So, but once you actually get all the equations right, someone has to be able to communicate that this is the right design that we should build. This house is going to stand up. How do we speak in English to communicate that? And yes, we can very straightforward, say these are the words, believe me. A lot of communication, and this is what I argue in the book, is is relationships, is trust. You know, you might be saying something to me, or I might be saying something to you, but if we don't really know each other or don't know anything about each other, you know, it's very easy for us to discount each other. But when we know each other a little bit, you know, I begin to know your heart, I begin to trust you, and I say, you know, I kind of like Dave. I believe what he's telling me. And while you may be telling me something from a technical perspective, whether it's engineering or science, or, you know, for really any topic, um, if I don't know you, I don't know. But if I know you, I trust you and I believe you. And that is, you know, a big part of why we need to have relationships. In it's not just business, it's in any organization or every part of our lives, that those are the connections that get us to believe each other.
Absolutely. I do a ton in this space as well. I talk extensively about trust with my clients as well. I totally relate to what you're saying. And how much does, in your mind, how much does how we feel about ourselves impact our ability to trust somebody else?
Well, it's not that we have to have you know, so much of a strong level of confidence, that we, you know, so that we can reach out to folks. It's really just that desire to say, you know, I would like to get to know someone else. Or actually, it's what I found in the book was not so much, or actually in my research, was not so much that we have to have this desire. It's just to try it. It's just to put ourselves in a situation to reach out. It's just sort of like go through the motions. Like, I don't know if I really want to get to know somebody, but I'll go through the motions and try. And then, like, poof, like, wow, you know, I can't believe that I actually, you know, like this person, or I'm getting to know them a little bit better. And then when we turn our attention to the work that's in front of us, you know, we have that trust developed, or that relationship where we believe each other. And that comes from the separate interaction, you know, sort of the warm up, or an icebreaker, or something where we spend a little time getting to know each other, even just talking about each other's weekend, or what we did last weekend or next weekend. That's enough of a connection to move us in the right direction. So just forcing ourselves to do that always comes out with a positive, you know, force that helps us work better together. As somebody like me from a technical background, I see this as a bit of an equation. The relationship part is just a different kind of an equation. It's a social equation. It may not be something that you can write down on paper, but there's a method to it. There's obviously science to it, you know, psychology and so on and so forth. And I'm not a psychologist, but nevertheless, I see it as a process and an equation that if you follow these steps, then the relationship part of your life grows and benefits, you know, all other elements of your life.
So I don't disagree with anything you just said. I think it's spot on. Now, in terms of team building, and you talk about the secrets to building a great team. How important is this? Is this an essential ingredient, a nice to have ingredient? How would you describe it?
Well, what I call it is sharing personal stories. And we've talked a little bit about this. It's the idea where we can, you know, you only need one person to actually, you know, have this idea to say, you know, let me learn a little bit more about Dave. And, you know, Dave, if I ask you questions about things going on in your life, eventually you're going to say, well, maybe I ought to ask some questions about Barry. And then you're going to learn a little bit about me. Even if it's lopsided, if one person has that notion to do it, then they can get it going, get the process going. Still, when we share personal stories about each other, whether it's just casual conversation like we're having now, or whether it's sort of methodically before a meeting, you know, let's say, you know, in a work environment, we do an icebreaker or warm up. Well, you know, those are two different names for the same kind of thing, where we talk about, you know, our journey, maybe how we got here. What was your first job? What was your most unusual job? I mean, these are the kind of things where you go around a room and somebody just says, you know, I cleaned out, garbage behind furnaces. And like, wow, and that's all they say. And then at the next break, you go like, well, tell me more about that, because, that sounds really, interesting. Or maybe they, their most unusual job was working for a summer, on a farm, with animals, and you have an interest in animals and you want to know more about that. And still the point is that it gets the ideas flowing about, this is an interesting person, more than what I know from what they're saying on the topic in this room. Maybe we're talking about, you know, utility line workers, or, who knows what it is, or, hurricane restoration, whatever, some technical topic. But to have an interesting, tidbit where you can go up to somebody at a break and say, yeah, I really want to know more about that. And now the two of you are exchanging, ideas about your, that most interesting job. And then when you have to, like I said, get to work, you kind of like that person, and you trust them, and you want to do a good job for each other.
Right. How does equity of voice tie into this? Because I would imagine it does.
Well, what I mentioned in that first part is that if I, start a conversation with you and I'm not expecting you to talk, well, it's still lopsided. Okay. If I'm talking 80% of the time, and you're only talking 20% of the time, we're having a conversation, but, you're not talking very much, and you're thinking, why am I standing here listening to this guy? So it's good to be conscious of the amount of time that you're talking, and you want to try to have that be about 50% of the time. Obviously, you want the conversation to be sort of ping-ponging back and forth. There's a way that I do it myself to force myself to talk less. I kind of like talking, and I think you like talking too. We're both talkers. How do we stop ourselves from talking too much? And the way that I found is by using filler words, which are things like saying, interesting, I'm responding to you, or, tell me more, or wow. But when I just respond with those kinds of words, it stops me from talking and encourages you to talk more. So I'm feeling like, good, I'm getting more out of Dave. And then hopefully you want to hear a little bit out of me. But if I feel like I'm dominating, I can use those words and phrases to slow me down and make sure that I'm connecting more with you and hearing more from you.
Right. I think that takes a level of consciousness that many people don't have. I do go off the rails. I am not even going to pretend I don't. And I am conscious of it. And I usually say that out of the gate. And I usually say things like, I am on a tangent. I don't even know how I got here right now. I'm going to shut up for a second. And I say that all the time, because I feel like if I don't, the person might pass away while I'm talking to them. So I've got to be really careful with that.
But that's really important. If both of us are talkers. So if you know that about yourself, then you catch yourself doing it. You can't stop yourself from talking. So you might as well just talk, go off on a tangent, whatever. And then you realize, well, hey, I think I've just been dominating the conversation here. And then you say it outright. That's a great way for that other person to say, yeah, well, I'm glad he said it, because that's exactly what I was thinking. I'd like to get a word in here edgewise. And now you're opening the door and you're saying, I want to hear from you.
Yeah.
And it's a ticket to have your conversation partner start talking. So keep doing that. It's okay to identify the situation, as you see it.
Yeah. So when I'm talking to my clients, or even my, my wife, my kids, I always ask them, when they're talking to people and interacting with other people, I always ask them, pay attention to those that ask you questions. And socially, even when you're out, and I don't know if you look at this even socially, I'm always wondering who's around me that's asking questions about other people, and who's only talking about themselves. how do you, how do you handle it when you've got somebody who's so dominant about telling their own stories? What's an effective way to deal with a personality like that? A tactful way.
Well, it depends on the relationship that you're trying to make. If this is somebody that you have to have a conversation with, that you have to develop a relationship with, the more that they talk, the better they're going to feel about you, which is kind of weird. If they're talking a lot, if you give them a free pass to talk, they're going to say, boy, I sure like talking to Dave, because I don't know what it was, but I just feel really good. So the more you get somebody else to talk, the better they're going to feel about you. Still, you're not going to feel like, maybe this relationship isn't for me, because it's not a really balanced relationship. They don't seem like they're that interested in me. So, I'm not really sure if it's the right kind of long-term relationship. So it depends, it's situational. So if it's a boss, you want the boss to feel good about you, let the boss talk a little bit longer, because, maybe that's what bosses do, because they have to get, their ideas out on the table. What I find is sort of that technique that you brought up, which is identifying the situation. If you find that your conversation partner is sort of dominating and you have something important to say, lead off with that. I have a story that I want to tell you. Can I tell you? Ask that question.
Mhm.
Can I get your permission to tell you? Obviously, you don't want to say permission, but say, can I tell you?
Yeah.
And then, assuming they agree, now it's on them to shut up. Right. And that's an interesting technique. It's a good technique. Get their permission for you to have the floor, so that you can tell your full story. And if they interrupt you, let them interrupt for 15 seconds or so and say, well, there's still more to say. Let me finish. And then they have to pause, because you sort of call them out in a nice way. Yeah. And you get the chance to tell your story.
So saying to somebody a story is exhausting me is probably not appropriate.
True. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so talk to me about, I'm going back and forth because I wrote so many things down. I make notes in the book and all that. I know it's not all about the book, but you also reference working with other people versus working alone, and the value of teamwork versus, I've been working by myself for 7+ years. And then in a previous life, I worked alone for a couple of years. I love it. And yet I never feel alone. I never feel alone because I get to talk to people like you. I talk to my clients every day. You just never stop communicating with people. But the idea, there are many people out there that they want to be around other people. So can you just elaborate on why that's important for some and maybe not for others?
Well, we tend to think about people as, introverted or extroverted, and you might put yourself in the category of somebody who's an extrovert, who you like talking to people. And when you get into a room, and this is the key, you get energy from talking to people. When you're with other people, this is exciting to you. This is, your energy rises. And then introverts at the other end of this spectrum are folks that sort of shrink from that. Oh, a room. I'm not sure what I'm going to do in this. I don't really want to talk to anybody. Maybe somebody will come and talk to me, and I'll respond to them. And that's sort of the other extreme. And then there are folks that are in the middle, that they can, and this is where a lot of folks are. Yeah, and I put myself in this category. I can turn it on and go into a room and engage with folks and meet new people and do all those things sort of the right way. And people tend to call me an extrovert, but I really need my alone time. And whatever that is, whether it's just reading or watching hockey or anything, I just need some quiet time. And and that's okay. Even I do play hockey, and my wife knows that after the game, it's a beer league, and after the game, I just have to sort of like be with the guys. And even if we're talking about stupid stuff that it benefits the relationship between me and my wife. So I can just let off steam in that way. So we have these, these categories of communication that we have within us. And it's good to know where we are, but still, before I walk into that room, I have to tell myself, okay, amp it up, say hello, introduce yourself. And those are the basic things. And that's just enough for me to get going. Now, I'm not a shrinking violet, but I still have that, I'm telling you, I've been a CEO for 25 years. I still have to tell myself that when I walk into a room that I have to amp myself up. I have this friend, his name is Tommy Tart, and I wrote about him in the book. And Tommy is one of these people who loves engaging with everyone. When you walk into a room, it's like he's suddenly friends with everybody. We were once golfing. Afterwards, we sat down and had lunch, and I went to the bathroom to wash my hands and came back, and Tommy was sitting at the table of two other guys. And I like, what's going on here, Tommy? He says, oh, well, I started talking to these guys. Let's sit down and have lunch with them. And one of them was a linebacker for the Kansas City Chiefs. And I was like, how did this happen? And whatever, we had a wonderful lunch. So it was just, every time I go out with Tommy, this kind of thing happens. So I asked him once, Tommy, how do you do it? How is it that wherever we go, you're suddenly friends with everyone? And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, Tommy, you don't realize that wherever you go, you're chatting with people and they're chatting back, and you like light up the whole place. And he said, nope, I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. Tommy, I'm just going to watch you and I'm going to see what you do. And this was in the early stages of me writing the book. I wasn't really thinking about writing the book. I was just curious. And I started to watch him. And what he did was, we'd walk into a restaurant and he'd say to the host, hey, how are you? I'm Tommy Tart. What's your name? And they'd say, well, my name's Jerry. Like, oh, good. We're looking for a table for two. Like, okay, that's good. And as we're walking to our table, it's like, so where are you from? Are you from Orlando? And like, no, I grew up in Boston. It's like, Boston, really? I was in Boston, recently. What part of Boston are you from? And immediately this person is talking about their life. He's got a little connection with them because he's been to Boston, and this is the key. He's really interested in hearing about them. Yep. He loves other people and he wants to know about other people. And if there's a connection, great. And if he hasn't been to Boston, he'll say, what's Boston like? And people will start talking about their hometown. They love talking about their hometown. So Tommy, before I get into a room, I often think, okay, what would Tommy do? What would Tommy do? Yeah. Tommy would reach out and ask people questions. And that key question, about where are you from? Where did you go to school? What was it like growing up there? Everybody loves talking about those kind of things.
Yeah, I think that's a great technique. As you're talking, I'm relating to what you said in the middle, where you can really you can be on your game in front of a room, but you need that quiet time. I'm so much like that. And, where I could have boundless energy in front of an audience, but I need that time where I'm reading or vegging out or working out in the yard or something like that. And I've got to pick my spots, because there are times where I just don't want the interaction, and there are times where I crave it. So it's so interesting to hear you say that. What about the positive intent piece when it comes to collaborating with people and connecting with people? What's that all about?
This is kind of a weird revelation, but most of us are in our own worlds. We're just thinking about ourselves, going through life. We're the hero of our story, and we're not thinking about other people. We're not trying to hurt anybody else. We're just moving along and doing whatever it is we need to do, taking a walk, going to work, interested in our own hobbies and what else is going on in our lives. And we're just not thinking too much about other people. But for some reason, when other people come into our lives and there's some little piece of friction, we have this tendency to think, hey, they're out to get us. they're not, no, people are not out to get us. They're not out to get us. They're just going through their life. And sometimes, there's a little negative interaction. It's just by chance, people are not out to get us, and assume going into an interaction, a conversation, that people actually want the best for us, because most of us do want the best for each other. You're in your orbit, I'm in my orbit. We're happy, being in separate orbits. We come into contact with each other. I'm glad that you're doing good. You're glad that I'm doing good. And then we move away from each other. Only for our closest family and closest friends, which is a small group, do we really have those strong, tighter interactions and relationships. But with everyone else, it's best just to flip that script and say, you know what, they want the best for what's going on in their world. I want the best for my world. And let's start from that place, from a positive place, as opposed to they're out to get us. Now, there are some people that are out to get us. They're a small fraction. They're in the single digits, the low single digits. These are the aggressive people. And those are the folks that you want to stay away from. When you find somebody that is really, aggressively going after other people, you want to distance yourself and move as far away as you can from them. If they're in your life, like somebody at work, you have to do everything you can to distance yourself from them and from the projects you're working on. Sometimes it can be very difficult. Nevertheless, it's something that you want to try to do is distance yourself from them. But that's just a small fraction. For everyone else, just give them the benefit of the doubt.
So you've been a CEO for a long time, and teamwork as a CEO, the people underneath you working together and well together is critical for the success of any organization, no matter what, whether it's a company or a team or an association. Oftentimes I've seen over the years, people do work against one another, or departments work against one another. Even delivery teams and sales teams unintentionally work against one another. And it's not like it's part of the design. It just kind of happens. And the whole positive intent thing is no longer a thought. And so I'm sure you've encountered things like this in the past, where you've got people that are just at odds, or departments at odds. How do you deal with that? How do you get them to even consider positive intent or understanding?
Well, Dave, I think what you have to do in terms of what we're talking here is like breaking down silos. You have silos in organizations where you want to try to bring people together. It has to be intentional. If we let it go on its own, that friction is going to continue. Mostly because we're team oriented. I'm not sure that I really like the Bruins that much, but I really like the Chicago Blackhawks. The thing is that we are kind of tribal when it comes to the things that are meaningful to us, whether it's our sports teams or our own department. These are our peeps, and we want to support what's going on in our world, even if as you sort of alluded to there, our incentives, if just because my team does well doesn't mean your team loses. That there may not be any incentive. It's just we kind of like our team and we want our team to do well, and it looks like your team maybe standing in the way. Is that the thing? Or maybe it's not that they're standing in the way, but just we know we want to do well, so we're just going to root for our team and we're not going to worry about your team. Well, in order to break down those silos, we have to do it intentionally. We have to actually get those folks together and do some of those techniques that we talked about in terms of just learning a little bit about each other and finding that crossover about where we grew up and what's going on in our lives. And we may find people in both groups that are into hiking, or maybe it's a sports team, or folks that are really into gardening or something, and you go like, wow, they're not so bad after all. And maybe we can both do better and make the company be better if we work together. And that's what we find when we reach out and learn a little bit about each other. It sounds like that couldn't possibly be that simple. but it is. And the reason why it's that simple is because we don't really do it that much.
You referenced tribalism. I was actually talking to somebody earlier about tribalism and how dangerous it can be. Sometimes it forms without us even realizing that it forms. Does that impact, or how does that impact civility?
There, we've got social media and cable news, and we form these groups that affirm our opinions rather than inform our opinions. We're not interested in learning so much as we are in just finding other people to say, hell yeah, I agree with that. And it's good to be curious. That's what I found as, in my work. People are coming at me all the time with ideas. And rather than just say, that'll never work, there may be a nugget of an idea in there that we can latch on to something, or maybe it's a brand new idea that we've never thought about, or maybe it's something we saw at Starbucks on customer service. And would that work in the utility business? I don't know if it would. Be curious. If we're curious about the idea and ask more questions and brainstorm about that, rather than being quick to judge. The more curious we are, we can run it to ground. We can figure out if there's a nugget of an idea in there. But if we're quick to judge, we miss out on all the opportunities to vet an idea. So it's a little bit painful to step out of our comfort zone, that affirmation zone. And when we find somebody maybe that disagrees with us, and when we do, maybe it's an interesting idea to say, tell me more. Why do you think that? Even if it's a tough political view, today the big issue is, vaccinations. And boy, step into a minefield and talk to folks that disagree with you one way or the other on vaccinations. What I find, I don't, now just, full disclosure, I'm vaccinated. And I have some friends, no colleagues at work. Our entire office has been vaccinated, but I, I'm in a lot of different worlds, and hockey is one of my worlds. And I have some friends on my team that I like, and they're not getting the vaccine. And rather than just say, well, you're an idiot, because that thought crosses my mind, and I want to say that, but that's because of my own rationalization. Instead, I want to try to understand them because they're my friend. Tell me why. And they tell me why, and they have, it may be a reasonable, rationale, or maybe bizarre. And, I want to keep them as a friend. And, this one issue is, we may agree on 90% of the things, but this one issue is just not one we're going to agree on. So we'll agree to disagree. Still, it helps me to understand a little bit about them. So when we're talking about another issue, I can have a feel for how to connect with them better. Maybe they come at something from a bizarre perspective. And when it happens again, I can be prepared to deal with it.
Yeah. So I asked you early on, how much does our own self-awareness, or how we feel about ourselves, impact our ability to do all these things that we're talking about right now? And one thing that is striking to me is the level of curiosity we really need to be having, or have, in order to connect with people, but also humility and the confidence to kind of drop your guard and to not judge, and all those things that, quite frankly, they're unspoken in a lot of ways. I wonder how often we're in our own way because we're not curious, we are judging, we aren't self-aware. I'm taking things personally. I can go back 30 years and I might have been offended by something you said because I misinterpreted your intention, and I would have taken it personally and said, Barry's arrogant, or whatever. And then today I look at it through a totally different lens. So what you're saying makes total sense. It totally relates to the work I do. And not everyone's at this place, right? I mean, I would think that this is an ongoing project that probably never ends.
Yeah, absolutely. it's hard to keep an open mind. It really is. And it's a challenge. Still, when you say it out loud and you try it, then you're taking that step forward. We're not perfect. Our creator is not finished with us. And it's just, having that self-awareness. You have an interaction, it didn't quite go as well as you wanted. And maybe next time I'll do better. Interestingly, when the COVID thing started, so this was last March, so March of 2020, my wife and I were in our little subdivision, and there's a pickleball court. Pickleball is like mini tennis.
Okay.
And there was a lot of freak out stuff. Playgrounds were closed, and they had closed the park that was near our house. But and they took down the nets of the pickleball court. And this is like a block away from our house. And we're like, we walked over here, we could just get on the court and just hit it back and forth, even though there was a little sign that said, don't get on the court. Well, it was just us. Nobody else was in the park. It was, and we live in the same house. So we just, hopped over the little fence and we're going back and forth. Well, one of our neighbors who we kind of like was walking, 100 yards away, and he saw us and he came over and he said, hey, you guys shouldn't be on that court. There's a sign there that says stay off the court. We got COVID, get off the court. And he turned around and he walked away. That was a year ago, March. So now it's May. And just last week, we got together for a very, sort of distanced, but a little party, I guess you could call it, or an event where people were actually, handful of people were getting together and talking to each other. It was kind of the first time I'd seen him in over a year. And he came up to me and he said, I got to apologize. I've been carrying this around for over a year, and I just feel terrible. I overreacted. I had this COVID freak out, and I've been wanting to say it for a year, but I just haven't seen you for a year. And, that was sort of like an example of what you were just saying, that self-awareness. I felt bad that he was knotted up for a year, but still he was at least aware enough and humble enough to come forward and say, yeah, I think I overreacted. And then I said, we shouldn't have been on the court in the first place. There was a sign and we were violating, that societal, pact, and we shouldn't have been there either. So, we didn't hug, but, we fist bumped, and now we're back to, our friendly self.
Well, I mean, the last year the messaging has been so mixed across the board. No matter where you stand on anything, you're never in the right spot. But we just did some traveling. We're in the airport terminal, vaccinated as well. I don't want any issues. Just get it done. So we're in the airport terminal. I don't know if you've flown recently, but you can only sit in certain seats and in the terminal. So this seat's blocked. You can have, your family can sit here. You can't sit here, all the way through the place. And then when you get on the plane, every seat is taken. I'm like, what are we doing? Like, you can't sit here, but you can sit here. Are you kidding me? So and the other thing is, when we came home, I ran out to pick up some takeout food. And I walked into a restaurant a couple miles from my house. It was packed. The restaurant was packed. The bar was packed. There was not a seat empty, and nobody had a mask on except the people working there. I walked in with my mask, and I went to get my takeout, and I almost felt like I was on a different planet. So I slid my mask down thinking, I think I'm going to be okay. And as soon as I did that, the mask police came out. Sir, put your mask back. It's because I was standing and not sitting. It was just like immediately somebody came right up, put your mask back. I was crazy. It was just crazy. I'm not here to debate masks or not, but I relate to your pickleball story. The one last thing that you talk about in the book, and I know you've alluded to in your answers here, is about just technology and the impact that technology has on our ability to kind of collaborate, connect, and understand each other. I suppose there's some good and some not so good. So what's your take on all that?
Well, let's talk about the good, and that is, I actually think that the Zooming is, as long as we don't overdo it, is a great advancement in the efficiency of society in a lot of ways. When I see my 90-year-old mom in Chicago, I'm in California. When I see her in California, I mean in Chicago on Zoom, it's I'm encouraged, because I can see her face, and even though it's a flat screen, it still is heartwarming to me. And the fact that you and I can see each other, only and when it comes to communication, 7% is our words, and 30%, 38% is the tone of our voice, and over half is the visual part. So when we can see each other, boy, that's more than half of the communication and the relationship that we can build. So there's a huge benefit to that. And then you throw in those ideas, those concepts of people living farther apart, and still having the ability to use technology to zoom in, to video technology, is a great advancement. There's just no question about it. If we were doing it a little bit at a time, that would have been a better way to introduce it to society. Still, we all got kind of zoomed out over the past year. So I think going forward, I think it's going to return to a level of normalcy, that we will be able to limit our travel, or limit sort of the inconsequential travel, and have good meetings. We still need to have in-person meetings. There's no question about it. It's an absolute must for building relationships. There's still, a lot we can do with this video technology. Unfortunately, technology has also brought us social media, where we find those tribes that we were talking about. We get our opinions validated as opposed to getting educated, and we can really go off the deep end on that. And that's the downside of technology. I mean, I think there are sort of big debates going on in politics about the proper use of things like Facebook when it comes to lying and posting things that are inaccurate. So there's definitely a downside. And the most important thing that we can do, that you and I can do, that everyone can do, is just to think a little bit. Well, what's really going on here? And it's sort of that idea that we talked about earlier about being curious. It's questioning our own philosophies, and is that quite right? Or maybe the other side has a point, and that's an okay thing. There's not a problem with that. And even just admitting it is okay. I like when I agree with somebody. I'm not that polarized, but I like it when I can agree with somebody who I know is polarized. And that's also a way to build a bridge, is if you're having a conversation that might seem like it has a lot of friction, is to find something to agree on. That's a great point. Yeah, I think that's really important. Now, there's other things that I disagree, but on that one, I really agree with you on. And your conversation partner might go like, what? They agree with me? Like, okay. Well, you're building a bridge there. So finding a little bit of something to agree on is valuable, even when you've got the hurdle of social media that you've got to get around.
Well, it's a courageous step, because we kind of live in an environment, especially politically, and you didn't shy away from. You were able to actually, in a very intelligent, fair way, bring up some tough political stuff in your book. We don't have to get into all of it, but the reality is we live in a world where you think A or you think B. There's nothing in between. You cannot agree with anything this side or this person thinks or says. And to your point, I think that's where some humility needs to creep in, where we say, you know what, I don't agree with everything you say, but I do like this. And the willingness to actually acknowledge that is huge. As I read your book, the person that kept coming to mind, and you ended up referencing him later on in the book, is John Maxwell. So I was reading the whole book, and I've read a few of his books, but there was one he wrote a number of years ago called "Everyone Communicates, Few Connect." I don't know if you read that one, but that was how I was feeling when I was reading your book, your stories and your perspectives. I'm like, well, there's a similarity here. So when you reference, I'm like, oh wow, that's probably where it comes from. Just similar philosophies. I read a ton now, and I didn't as a kid. I will say though, that the more I read and the more I talk to people like you, the more I realize that there is a path and there is a way. I'd like to see more people doing things like this. So I'll give you the last word, Barry. Anything that I didn't ask you, anything that we didn't talk about that we should have talked about?
We talked about a lot, which is good, and I think that that concept of just finding out a little bit about others, sharing personal stories is really good. There's one story that it was sort of a turning point for me. Let me share that with you, because I thought that I was, the God's gift to the world, and somebody put me in my place, and that was one of my children. So we were standing in line at the supermarket when my daughter was an early teenager. She was about 13, and going through the line, the person checking us out said, "Did you find everything okay?" And I said, "Yep." And then she said, "Sure is nice weather we're having." And I said, "Yep." And then she said, "How about those Seminoles?" And I was in Tallahassee, Florida. So she was talking about the Florida State Seminoles. And I said, "They're doing good." And finished checking out. And we stepped maybe 3 feet away from that counter. And my daughter said to me, "Dad, you weren't very nice to that lady." And I thought, as we walked to the car, well, I wasn't not nice. I was neutral. And I said to my daughter, I was neutral to her. I was okay. She said, "I don't know how it sounded to you, but to me, it sounded like you weren't very nice." And we walked in silence to the car as I was, stewing a little bit, thinking, what was that like? What was it like maybe from her perspective, trying to, be a good role model for my kid. I put the groceries in the back of the car. She got in the passenger seat. And as I sat down in the driver's seat, I turned to her and I said, "Emily, you're right. I can see how from the checkout person's perspective or from your perspective, my interaction could be seen as negative. I thought it was neutral, but I can see how it could be seen as negative. And, I'm going to try to do better." And from that moment on, whenever I get into one of those interactions, I force myself to be the one asking the questions. So when I go to Starbucks, I'll ask them questions, how their day is going, or, wow, it sure seems like busy, like it's busy today. Or I do this kind of crazy thing, which is after I get my coffee from Starbucks or a specialty drink like a latte, I'll take a sip and then I'll go back to the counter and I'll say, "Can I talk to the person who made this?" And they're freaking out like, "Oh, geez, another one of these." And I'll say, "I just want you to know that you made this drink perfectly. Thank you." And I turn around and I walk away. And, I don't wait for the whole interaction to be, positive and lovey-dovey. I just want to give them a little gift. And that kind of interaction, that positive interaction, leaves people with this sort of like Christmas in July experience. Like, "Oh, wow, that was really nice." I just want to give people more positive interactions because of that one, experience at that supermarket. I don't want my neutrality to look like it's a negative thing. You have to make the effort to connect with people. And when you do, it always results in something positive.
I'll leave it at that. I really enjoyed this conversation, Barry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. It's been great to be with you. I'm cutting through the noise.
All right, we'll talk soon.